Hello and welcome to the second episode in our Major Arcana series, looking at each of the Major Arcana cards in the tarot in turn in a very deep and almost geeky way. This is the second episode where we will be looking at the High Priestess, or the Papesse. We will be looking at its name, its number, some legends and myths behind it, as well as the hidden symbols in the card, including drawing over the card. So stay tuned as we deep dive into the meaning of the High Priestess. Welcome back. So the High Priestess, it used to be called the Papesse. So we are going to be dealing with two different names of this card and two very different styles. I said in the last video on the Magician, if you haven't watched it, click the link, about this being one of my favourite cards, and it really is. It's quite a detailed, very symbolic card that has a lot of layers, and lots of the tarot designers really took a job to kind of redesign it. So especially when we look at the Pamela Colman Smith, you'll see an awful lot of difference, more probably differences than similarities on this card. So let's take a look at the cards in front. So we're actually going to be using three decks today. We're going to be carrying on with the veritable Tarot de Marseille, the Marseille based tarot. We'll be looking at the Pamela Colman Smith, and I will make a mention and a reference to this, which is this Visconti's Forza deck, but not quite yet. So, quite a lot of modern tarot, it comes after the Rider-Waite-Smith name, the High Priestess. This wasn't always named the High Priestess. This started being called the High Priestess after the kind of occult influences of the tarot that started with the French school and moved obviously and was taken up by the Golden Dawn. So quite often the card will be called the High Priestess. However, before the occult use of cards and the occult symbology of the cards, it used to be called the female pope, the Papesse. So if you have a Marseille deck, it's more likely to be called Popess. If you have a modern deck, it's more likely to be called the High Priestess. The name changed by a French occultist by the name of Court de Gebelin, who likened the tarot to an ancient Egyptian book of secrets and mysteries that had been copied by initiates down the ages and thus had survived into our times as playing cards. This is completely false. We don't believe that now. We've got evidence completely to the contrary. However, that early influence in 1800s-ish kind of led to the renaming of this card and led to the adoption of this High Priestess of Isis, ancient Egyptian kind of symbolism that you certainly see in the Rider-Waite-Smith, as well as some of the early French occult tarots like the Oswald Worth deck. So this name change was because occultists assigned the tarot deck to the Book of Thoth, an ancient Egyptian book of mysticism and wisdom. So that's where the name change comes from. So if we look at the name of the older cards, the Marseille deck for now, we've got something that may surprise some modern day readers. We've got a female pope, which on its surface seems very heretical. Why would people that were living in 1400s ascribe a tarot card to a female pope? That is completely heretical. You know, only males can be popes. So what is this and why was it used in playing cards? Well, there's a lot of theories about this, an awful lot of theories, and some of them are more likely than others. The first theory is about this being a representation of someone called Pope Joan. Pope Joan was a legendary character in kind of Christian folklore about a woman who became pope. She is rumoured, this kind of folklore sprung up in about the 1100s through to 1300s, so kind of Middle Ages and medieval kind of times, and it was first circulated, I think, around in Germany, and it was a legend of an English woman called Joan, who was so devout that she went and studied in overseas in Europe, and she became so well known for her wisdom that they eventually elected her pope, not realizing that she was female because she was dressing up to pass as a male. So the secret apparently came out when Pope Joan accidentally gave birth on some say on the papal throne itself, like ex cathedra, and some say it on a procession. However, she gave birth, thus revealing the fact that she had been female all along. So the legend goes that they killed her and her newly born child as being heretical. So there is further legends about the Catholic Church that when a pope is elected, because of Pope Joan, they check that he is male by a specially designed seat with a hole in it where he sits without any underwear, so that a cardinal or a bishop can reach underneath and check that he has the necessary equipment for his job role. The cardinal or bishop is then supposed to pronounce habet, which is shorthand, but it's from the Latin word verb meaning he has them, and it kind of comes from he has two testicles, that kind of background. So there's a lot of this legend that's built around the Catholic Church on this kind of false myth. None of them are true. I'm not a Catholic scholar, but I'm pretty sure all of that is rumour mongering and things being built on earlier legends. So I don't think popes are checked for having the necessary equipment for the office nowadays, but some people see this as a representation of the legend of Pope Joan, and that gives some interesting ways to interpret this card, which I'll talk about later. The likelihood of it being Pope Joan is very little, mostly because in the medieval times she was normally depicted giving birth to really demonstrate that it was Pope Joan, and this has purposely not been depicted like that, so it probably isn't going to be really Pope Joan depicted in the tarot card. Another possibility is someone called Manfreda Visconti. This is a real piece of Christian folklore, kind of Catholic history, where many centuries ago there was an awful lot of popes. There was a popes, anti-popes. I'm not a historian, but my other half is a huge history geek, and I kind of get talked about the anti-popes quite a lot. However, there was a sect called the Guglielmites who formed around a woman called Guglielma. I might be pronouncing that all right out below. And she was seen as an embodied saint or a mystic, and almost like the second coming of Jesus, and was kind of seen as very sacred. And her followers believed that she would later reincarnate in a different body, bringing about a more feminist and female-centered Catholic Church. This was in a time where a lot of people craved that divine feminine, and the Church reacted by raising the Virgin Mary up to almost kind of equal to Jesus Christ. So she became the divine feminine. But before that, there was an awful lot of issues of these kind of female saints kind of cropping up. So in about the 1300s, the followers of this woman, the Guglielmites, they elected a woman called Manfreda Visconti. The Visconti family would then later on go and produce, or have produced for them, some of the earliest tarot cards. They were hand painted, and I'm about to show you one. So Manfreda Visconti didn't last long. Eventually, the Inquisition kind of banded them together, seen them as heretical, and killed them all. And the Visconti family suffered with that tarnish for a good 100 or 200 years, with some of the heads being called up by the Inquisition quite a bit to check that they weren't supporting other people other than the Pope. So this was apparently depicted in the Visconti Sforza deck. There is 3, I think, historical Visconti decks. This is one of the earliest. This has been restored with some gold foil, as you can see. But these are very early, hand-painted, not printed like these on wood blocks, but these are hand-painted. And these were like high-end it was designed for, I think, for a marriage, the Visconti Sforza, so the marriage between the Visconti family and the Sforza. And legend has it that it depicts some of the history of the families in each of the cards, and family members become like the moon or the chariot. So these would be used as very fancy gaming cards by the family. And here we have the Papesse, the female pope, and it is believed that she could be Manfreda Visconti, who was a ancestor of the people that owned these cards. So it could be representing her. The argument against that is that she's wearing these Franciscan, almost the Poor Clare's kind of style robes. And the argument is that it might not represent Manfreda, but it might actually represent Guglielma or her sister. However, it could be the Visconti female pope, who was elected by her followers to be pope, and I think they even kind of spent an awful lot of money kind of buying her all the equipment as well, like all these blessing vessels, only for her to be executed by the Inquisition. So you can see her wearing what's called the Triregnum. You'll also see this in the Pope card, this 3-tiered crown. The original 3-tiered crown, they seem to get bigger. It used to be a papal tiara, and then one of the popes, I think Gregory, added an extra layer to it, and then it got added to again until there was 3 layers, and it was supposed to be crowned by a ruby. And I think part of the story of that crown is that before that the Vatican became like the seat of power for the church, it was flicking around, and this tiara was basically following these popes around, and the ruby went missing at one point, and then I think in about the mid to late 1400s the actual crown itself completely went missing and was never found again. So it could be that we see it in the pope, the female pope, the High Priestess card, as well as the Pope card, or the Hierophant in the RWS deck. So it's an interesting representation of history, and people sometimes read into this 3-tiered crown. So that is a possibility that it is Sister Manfreda. But because of the outfit, some people even disregard this. And the question mark is whether they would have put a heretical person on a playing card deck and then basically printed it and produced them underneath the Catholic Church without getting punished. So it could be a representation of something that wasn't seen as heretical. So some people see the Papesse as being a representation of the church itself. So sometimes the church is seen as a female pope. This is depicted in some statues in Rome and various other places. And I think when the pope is, what's the right word? Pope is coronated. The pope is, once again, this is where the lack of Catholic history comes from. When he's kind of proclaimed pope, they go through a ceremony where he marries the church, essentially. And that is possible because the church is seen as the feminine. So this could be an embodiment of the church, of the body of Christ as female. So that's quite possible. The way it's been interpreted over the ages is obviously as a female pope, the female embodiment of the church, especially in A.E. Waite, or sometimes the Shekinah in Jewish Kabbalistic mythology, I suppose, the female divine spirit, the divine feminine in mystical Judaism. So those are some of the ways that it's seen. So this is why we see a popess, a female pope, that it might not be heretical, it might be the embodiment of the church, or it might be heretical if we see it as Sister Manfreda, or we see it as Pope Joan. That gives some interesting interpretations to this card. So we could see this as heretical, we could see this as the divine feminine, but also because of the Pope Joan story, we could see this as a representation of the non-defined gender roles, the feminine presenting as masculine, or the androgyny. So one modern interpretation could be of trans people or of gender queer people in the tarot, and this could be seen as a representation of that due to that story. Sorry about the little gap there. That was because I had a thing flashing on my screen saying low battery, and I had to just figure out which it was. It's actually my drawing tablet, so I just plugged it into charge. Right, anyway, back to the card. So it can be seen as representing those kind of very modern interpretation of gender in the card. So we don't have to translate that as totally traditional. So the name changes here. As I said, it was originally from the French occultists, attributing it to ancient Egyptian mythology and the high priestesses. So you can see that kind of Egyptian influence, especially in her hat. That is kind of like the crown of Hathor, as she could be seen as a priestess of Isis. So that's why there's two different names. Quite an awful lot of them kind of follow this route. There is also another strain of cards that stem from the kind of the French Protestants. When the religious iconography was not so palatable to especially like the Protestants, they created some decks that actually had this card as Juno. So sometimes you can see it as Juno, and in some cards you can even see it as the Spanish captain. So sometimes this card isn't actually depicted at all because of those religious iconography, not because of the heretical nature of a female pope, but because of removing secularizing the tarot, removing the kind of overtly religious iconography. So there you go. Right, let us talk about the number. So as you are aware, we went from number 1, the magician, and we were talking about it being the persona or the personality or the ego, the I. Now we've got I, like I, Captain. We've got a duality. We've got the 1 becomes 2. So we've doubled, but we've also got this sense of duality, this sense of balance, and this sense of polarity. So where one is unified and indivisible, we've got now a number that is divisible, and is divisible in two, and we certainly see that when we kind of come to the Rider-Waite card in a minute. So with this card, there are sometimes some references to like yin and yang, especially on the Oswald Worth deck. You see the yin and yang on the book, but we have definitely this sense of polarity. The face of the Papesse is staring that way, very similar to the magician. The magician was staring slightly down, if you remember. This is staring very, very fixedly straight across to the left. This can be seen as her reminiscing about the past. This can be seen as a passivity, like a reflection rather than a projection. You know, sometimes the cards that look to the right are very active. They're about moving forward. So the Fool, even though we're doing it last, is looking right. It's almost jumping over a cliff. It's very positive. It's moving forward. It's careering forward. The Papesse is not about that. It's about passivity. If you look at duality, it's about that, taking time, reflecting and considering. So this looking to the left is kind of reminiscent of that. She is obviously looking at the card that went before her, which is the Magician. So in some ways she's kind of linked to that Magician. She's kind of reflecting on the way that he's acting and kind of acting almost the opposite. He's about kind of creativity and putting on a show. She's not about a show. Here, the High Priestess is staring straight out. This is quite common of the Pamela Colman-Smith cards. Quite an awful lot of them stare at the viewer. It's one of the reasons why I'm not hugely fond of the Rider-Waite, because they're always so confronting. Now, let's look at some of the symbols of the imagery in this card, and then we will get to this one in a second. There's an awful lot in this. So the first thing to note is this will be very obvious when we've got to the Pope. If you are watching these order and the Pope is there, feel free to jump across to look at the Pope so that you can kind of compare it to the Papesse. The Papesse is wearing a blue cloak with red interior. In the Pope, it's the opposite. It's the red outside and the blue interior. Obviously, that changes depending on the edition of the Marseille, but quite a lot of the early writers kind of comment on that contrast. We have her with this very large cloak and this book that is partly obscured. This is something that Pamela Colman-Smith does here, and we will talk about this scroll in a bit. But this could symbolize not fully revealing something, not fully revealing all of knowledge or wisdom. If you see the book as a symbol of wisdom, we can see that the slight covering of it is about slightly shrouded, not being able to fully comprehend or see or experience all of the mystery, all of the wisdom. So it could be that. Let us jump over to the this, and I will show you a couple of things here because it's easier. So as usual, I'm using the Madani Marseille deck. This is like 1730s, I think, and this is the son. So the father was a card maker and produced one of the first Madani decks, and this is the son. Anyway, so if we look at we've got the Triregnum here, this 3-leveled crown. Yeah, and then there's a little bit here. More interestingly, we can just see this topped here, touching the top of the card. This sometimes is seen as meaning like this has access to the divine. This card, this female Pope, has direct access to divine, the divine truths via her intuition. Yeah, so this card is an awful lot about that female wisdom that is divine. So the feminine wisdom, the female divine. On my cards, you'll see on the Chris Haddad deck, he interprets this interestingly by putting this kind of ray, this divine ray that's normally coloured yellow, like here, to show this access to the divine. I'll show you that on my card in a minute. You will also see this scroll, and this is interpreted beautifully on the Pamela Collins Smith deck. This veil, this veiling of the mysteries, or to stand talking in front of a veil, implies that beyond it is divine and the sacred, the mysteries. It becomes a gate to the mysteries, or the gate to the divine, that she is a speaker of. So if we saw her almost as a seer or as a prophet or an oracle, that she has this access to the divine or the mysteries that she chooses to reveal. And this is also a hint in this book. As I said, like it kind of is partially covered here, you can see. This partial covering kind of almost hints at mysteries or secrets that she's not ready to reveal. This is also can be seen as a documentation. This can be seen as contracts or books or things that need to be signed. So this kind of book here doesn't necessarily just have to mean wisdom in interpretation. It can mean like contracts. But this covering of it is showing that she's got access to wisdom, that she's not always revealing it. So it could be kind of secretism or holding things back. The other thing is that she is heavily clothed. When we compare her to later tarot cards, she's wearing an awful lot of clothes. In fact, like some of the later ones are mostly nude or very lightly draped. This can be kind of almost denying the physicality. This can also be hiding away the physicality. This refusal to be embodied, you know, that she is the divine wisdom of spiritual, and the spiritual is what matters here, not the physicality of the body. And we can see that obviously by that Pope Joan story, that I hesitate to say it because it may be interpreted wrong, but that denial of being embodied as female. In the Pope Jones story, that doesn't have to be interpreted in modern day card reading that they are under denial that they're female, but that kind of denial, that removal of that extrapolation from the material and the body. So that's heavy clothed. Here, if we look here, we can see that the opening of her cape has this interesting contour, this interesting shape that goes up here and can be seen as extending through these straps and around and up. Yeah. So this can be seen as this is another thing that I might get slated at in the comments. This can be seen as the female vulva, the shape of the vulva, or the shape of some very shapely labia. The kind of the Sheila Nagig, this shape of the female divine, and I see this as kind of like linking to that female divinity, that female. The female body as divine, the female body as sacred, even though it's hidden and even though it's obscured in you know, being a drape, it's there for all to see. The other thing and I might have to zoom in for this bit. Oh, where's my zoom? It's very low. These straps. So you can see these straps here, the two that go across the body. This is probably not the best colour for this. I just wanted to choose something that was reminiscent of the colours on the deck. You can also see just here faintly these crosses. Sometimes they're more prominent on other things, and sometimes there's three of them. There's normally one here, there's one on that underneath scrap, and one here. So this number 3 is about the the divine becoming manifest. It's about things that are becoming material. It's the first solid shape. If you imagine like 1 being a single dot, 2 being a line, and then 3 is a shape. Yeah, it's its first material form. It's a triangle. So these 3 crosses can mean the divine triad, obviously, Son, Father, Holy Spirit, but it can also be kind of about materializing the divine. It can be about bringing the divine into being, and which is what she does. She's touching the divine at the top, and she's making it manifest by her speech or by her words. And interestingly, some of the early tarot readers link her to the Hebrew symbol, Hebrew letter, bet or be, and it's under that symbol that's seen as the mouth, and therefore she kind of is speech, and sometimes about things not said. And that's another thing about these straps. These straps, if I just jump up to here, kind of hem in the body. They hold in the body. They kind of almost reserve the body. And if you're at home watching this, please just do this and feel how you feel. Embody that symbol, and you can kind of feel this removal, this stepping back, this almost like self-comforting, but I'm not going to react to this. I'm going to conserve my energy and reflect on it before I make action. So it's kind of holding oneself back, hemming oneself in. And that's also something that's really kind of the Papesse or the High Priestess, this reservation. If she is to answer a question about how is it best to respond to this horrible email about me, by saying nothing, by reserving, by considering your next steps, by reflecting on it. Like I said, she's looking to the past, and she's reflecting on the behavior. So these kind of straps, sometimes they're referred to as a solar cross, but I don't really see it and I don't quite get that. But what they are to me is like these straps holding in the body, and it's almost reserving the body so that one's reaction can be one of stoicism rather than one of reaction. So yeah, makes sense. Sometimes one of the best things to do about these cards is embody it, like by holding it. You know, if you want to go and grab a book off the shelf and put it there and wear 2 car seat belts around your chest to feel that, do it, because it'll kind of really help you understand what it's like to be that card, and therefore how that card will respond to certain situations. Anyway, let's dive back in. So, desktop. Yes, I still do have my thing. So this can be this crossing. Oh, we're back to black. Crossing of the body. Yeah, this holding in of the body. So let's just zoom back out. The other thing, a bit too far there. The other thing that you will see is that she is seated. So this is not a card of action, it is about one of reservation. Yeah, this is in contrast to the passivity of earlier cards. So we have the Fool, although we're not doing the Fool quite yet, who is jumping ahead. We've got the Magician, who is fully acting and being a showman, and now we've got the Papesse, who is like the contrary to number 1. She's in a state of repose, she's in a state of reflection. The colours of her robe are traditionally complementing, I'm not sure whether I said this already, complementing the Pope. If I did say it already, I might have mentioned that sometimes the colours change, and here it's red, and the Pope is blue. Here is in my Chris Hadder deck. On here it's the opposite. So yes, and then this object here is, no, I've lost my brush, is a sometimes it can be seen in some cards as the back of someone's head, like the Pope has these two things, two heads here. On the Papesse, it's just one. So it could be seen as a rock, or it could be seen as a mound, or that kind of earthliness. It's kind of hinting at the earth of the Empress. In the Rider-Waite-Smith, which we'll look at in a minute, she's not got that. She's got a moon instead, like this. A little bit nicer than that, mind you. So those are some of the hidden symbols. You can also see this as being a triangle here. And you can also see this seated repose as being a square or a cube, and interpret that as is. But those are the main ones. So let's just undo some of that so we can just appreciate the card a little bit better. There you go. So that's the High Priestess of the Madone. Right, let us go back to here. So now we can look at the Rider-Waite-Smith deck and understand some of the reasons why it's so different. Instead of this crossing on the chest, we instead have this cross on the chest, just a single cross. Instead of having this, I did make a mention of this, but this is how Chris Hadder does it. This opening up and breaking of the tarot card frame to kind of say touching divine. So instead of this Triregnum or this here is just a two-leveled crown, we've got this crown of Hathor, or this crown of a High Priestess of Isis, or however you want to see it. So we do have differences. The similarities, we have a veil. This is decorated with pomegranates, talking about the mystery or the mysteries. We do have some form of documentation. We do have a robed priestess in both cards of female divinity, and we do have this obscuring. In this card we have, and it's hard not to be a schoolboy here, but we have these two columns that have the wonderful letters B and J on them. This stands for Boaz or Baz, and Yakin or Yakayin, depending on your Hebrew pronunciation, and mine's not brilliant. These are the two pillars of the Solomonic temple, the first temple. And we can see that as almost like a reflection of the number 2, this duality. And we can see that one is black and that one is white. Now, these pillars in the Solomonic temple were supposedly made of brass or bronze, which is a metal that combines both dualistically masculine and dualistically feminine metals. So they may appear to be opposites, but they are unity because they are both made of the same material and they both have each other in it. So it's almost that yin and yang principle here. Now, these can be interpreted in 2 different ways. These are real big on, even Freemasonry lodges still normally have these to represent, to walk through. But sometimes it's seen as kind of creating this portico where by going through, you get reborn, you get kind of this new beginning. They are seen as like entering into the temple. So you can see this portal or this gate to the divine, and you can see that this veil between them that she's gatekeeper of. She's the phone gatekeeper, the Karen of the mysteries. So the traditional meanings, and I always get this the wrong way around, so I've tried to kind of take a note here. So the B is sometimes seen as unity and love, and the J is sometimes seen as unity and strength, that they are seen as unity, like the one, but presented as the two. It can also mean power and firm in structure, and sometimes they're linked to the star signs of Cancer and of Capricorn, or the birth and death. So life and death, birth and death. So they're very much like talking about opposites, but in a unified way. You know, birth and death aren't really opposites, they're just two ends of life. So that's where this comes from. This is also in the Golden Dawn as well as Freemasonry. The veil, like I said, is the veil of the mysteries. Behind the veil, we can just see this hint of water, this hint of a very large body of water. I think if I remember correctly, Rachel Pollock in 78 Degrees of Wisdom talk about that there's possibly hills here, but I've never been able to see hills, so I don't know where she's getting it from. In some cards, you see the Tower of the Moon card in the background, not in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. You just see a large body of water, and sometimes it's commented that the towers and the moon are these columns. They're sometimes reflected. However, not here. So this large bodies of water seen as divine feminine, the emotions, the intuition, the traditionally inverted commas female principles of life embodied as water. So there's this ethereal robe, and she's sitting on this very solid stone cube. This is almost similar to the Emperor, and this kind of 4x4 structure shows materialism and the material world. So she's like the divine feminine seated in this world, but she holds the keys to the other world. In some of the Marseille decks, she's also seen as holding keys, which is an interesting kind of allusion to the church and St. Peter, but not here. So on the scroll, you can see that the scroll is partly covered, symbolizing the same thing that we talked about in the Marseille deck, but here we can see a little bit of writing which is supposed to say Torah, T-O-R-A, so the Jewish religious book texts, but spelt in an interesting, really weird way. I've never quite seen that as an A. It's not quite focusing on the camera, but I find that quite hard to see as an A. It either looks like another R or an E, but people have always said it's a T-O-R-A, so I just believe them and go along with the flow. So T-O-R-A, if you rearrange that slightly, T-A-R-O is tarot, so tarot becomes the word of the great law, the word of wisdom, and Torah likewise is the word of wisdom. So there was a lot in early, especially French occultism, about this four-lettered T-A-R-O being rewritten in different ways. So rota, R-O-T-A, being the wheel, and thus the wheel in the Rider-Waite has those letters on it. Excuse me. But here we kind of see it written as Torah, or a book of religious significance. We see her putting her foot on the moon, and this can be seen as interpreting that she has mastery over intuition. It can also be linked to the divine feminine. We see this sometimes in the kind of very early Spanishy churches with the Virgin Mary. I think I went in one with a beautiful statue of the Virgin Mary in the Canary Islands in Fuerteventura, that had this semi-moon on it. So it can be talking about the divine, the feminine divine, the divine female, and the feminine mysteries. It can also be about intuition. So there's that. What else is there that we haven't talked about? The cards are in this is light blue, which matches the water, and we've discussed the pomegranates on the veil. Good. Pamela Coleman Smith, signature there. Right. So I have talked about the seatedness, I have talked about the crossed over the body, I've talked about the open book, the colours are being reversed in the Pope and the thingies. So I think that is everything that I wanted to share to you about this card, other than divinatory meanings. So reading this card can be a mixture of all of those different aspects. So it can be about secrets or mysteries that haven't been revealed yet because of that book that's slightly obscured. It can also be about the female divine and the ability of intuition in the person you're reading for. In old style reading where a significator is important, if you are reading for a male in older fashioned gender norms, then this card appearing could be the woman that the man is interested in, so like a love suitor. If you are reading for a female, then this can represent them themselves, and obviously the magician is the male querent or the man that the woman is interested in. There's so many traditional assumptions there, it scares me, but there you go. So that's the traditional. This can stand for touching of divinity, but it can also warn someone of holding things back, keeping things reserved, and considering one's response before one acts. So it is one of passivity, it is one of stoicism, and it is one of reflected wisdom rather than act first, think later. So if you have it in a spread about how you should react or how you should process something, then it is saying take time and reflect on it. The negative connotations of this card can be about secrecy and inaction. So if it comes up in a negative format or reversed, it can be about being too secretive or even slightly deceitful, though deceitful is probably a little bit more on the magician, but that not revealing things. It can also talk about taboo subjects, things that we are not willing to talk about but are present and available. The other thing that it can talk about is talking about that reticence, that inability to act, and that too long spent pondering things rather than taking the action that needs. I hope that you can kind of see how I'm extracting those meanings from the symbols in the card. The other thing it can mean in a more mystical sense is about initiation and stepping beyond that veil, about how we access those mysteries and we access that divinity and that inner knowledge with oneself. And then I've also mentioned about the legends, those Pope Joan myths, and how we can interpret this card in a modern way, being referencing to genderqueer and to people that fall out of that gender binary, male is male, female is female, because of that myth, because of that woman being in a man's world or in a male role. So we can extract that meaning as being trans, we could talk that about them being androgynous, but we can also talk it about not being one comfortable with one's body, especially if we're looking at health. So I hope that was helpful. That was a real big, deep, geeky dive into the High Priestess card, or the Papesse. Probably slightly longer than I should have spent, but I hope that's been helpful anyway. The next card in the sequence is card number 3, which equates to the Empress, the Imperatrice. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me an awful lot and it keeps me motivated to make more. And there are 22 cards in this sequence before we get onto the minor cards, so your support will help me. So please click subscribe below if you're not already. I will make reference to the things that I've talked about underneath in the description. and please play along to the next video in the sequence. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.